Hello teachers, learners, and parents. Sir Jeff po, at your service. Alam nyo ba na meron tayong website na tinatawag na DepEd Commons? Ang DepEd Commons ay binuo upang gawing accessible ang pagtuturo at pag-aaral dito sa ating bansa gamit lamang ang inyong mga smart devices gaya ng cellphones, tablets, at computers. Dito ay maaari nating ma-access ang iba't ibang learning materials mula sa Department of Education. Meron itong mga interactive materials, electronic self-learning modules, at instructional video lessons mula sa DepEd TV na tiyak na makatutulong sa pag-aaral ng mga mag-aaral galing ka man sa public o private school. Walang problema dahil welcome ang lahat dito. Para ito sa mga guro, magulang at mga mag-aaral mula sa kinder hanggang grade 12, alternative learning system o ALS, at pati na rin ang special education. At huwag kang mag-alala dahil kahit walang load ay maaari mong ma-access ang mga learning materials. Tama! Libre ito. Ang kailangan mo lamang gawin ay i-on ang iyong data at buksan lamang ang iyong browser at i-type ang commons.deped.gov.ph. Alam na ba ng iyong mga kasamahang guro o mag-aral ang tungkol sa DepEd Commons? I-share mo na ang video na ito upang matuto rin sila kung paano gagamitin ang DepEd Commons sa mabilis at napakadaling paraan. Muli, ito po si Sir Jeff at kita-kits po tayo sa DepEd Commons. Paalam!
Magandang araw! Sir Wilbur po, at your service. Narito ang ETUlay upang gabayan ka sa inyong pag-aaral upang lubos na maunawaan ang iba't ibang paksa o subject. Ang ETUlay ay isang free online tutorial class na pinangungunahan ng DepEd Educational Technology Unit sa pamumuno ni Undersecretary Elaine Del B. Pascua. Ang programang ito ay hindi lamang para sa mga bata, kundi ito rin ay magsisilbing gabay sa mga magulang at mga guro kung paano nila ituturo o gagabayan sa bawat asignatura ang kanilang mga anak o mga estudyante. Sa kasalukuyan, ang self-learning module mula sa rehiyon ng Calabarzon at kilala sa tawag na pivot ang ginagamit sa ating ETUlay online class. Kaya ano pang hinihintay ninyo? Ihanda na ang inyong mga ballpen o lapis, papel o kwaderno at samahan kaming itulay ang pagkatuto para sa bawat batang Pilipino. Sama-sama tayong magtutulungan para malampasan ang mga hamon sa panahong ito. Halina't matuto kasama ang inyong online tutor sa oras na ito.
Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Kumusta po kayo? Welcome to another online tutorial session ngayong Lunes ng hapon dito sa ETUlay Senior High School Physical Science sa oras na 4 to 4:40 in the afternoon. Tutor Lester po, at your service. Today we are on the third quarter, week 3. Ang paksa ngayong hapon ay Polarity of Molecules. Ang module na ating pinagbabatayan ng ating tutorial session ay ang Alternative Delivery Mode ADM module ng Calabarzon. At the end of the session, you are expected to first, alamin ang pagkakaiba ng polar at non-polar bonds. Pangalawa, alamin ang polarity ng chemical bonds ng mga atoms gamit ang konsepto ng electronegativity. Maging pamilyar sa iba't ibang molecular shape. Pangapat, ipaliwanag kung paano nakakaapekto sa polarity ng molecule ang polarity of bonds at molecular geometry. Magsimula po muna tayo sa isang pretest na may 10 katanungan. Ang pretest na ito ay sumusuri po sa inyong prior knowledge ukol sa ating paksa ngayong hapon. Piliin lamang po ang tamang sagot sa pagpipilian. Simulan po natin sa unang katanungan. It refers to the ability of an atom in a molecule to attract shared electrons. A. Electron affinity. B. Electronegativity. C. Ionization energy. D. Electromotive force. Ang tamang sagot po ay electronegativity. Pangalawang tanong. Which of the following statement is true about polar bonds? A. They are present in metals. B. They are responsible for the formation of ionic compounds. C. They always result to the formation of polar molecular compounds. D. They may result to non-polar covalent compounds depending on molecular geometry. Tamang sagot po ay letter D. Pangatlo, what type of chemical bonds hold the atoms of water molecule together? A. Hydrogen bond. B. Ionic bond. C. Polar covalent bond. D. Non-polar covalent bond. Tamang sagot po ay C. Polar covalent bond. Which of the following molecule is non-polar? A. Sodium chloride. B. Hydrogen chloride. C. Carbon dioxide. D. Ammonia. Ang tamang sagot po ay carbon dioxide. Panglima, what is the electronegativity difference of carbon and oxygen bond? A. 0. B. 0.5. C. 1.0. D. 1.5. Tamang sagot po ay 1.0. The general trend of electronegativity as you move from top to bottom of the periodic table is increasing. True or false? Ang tamang sagot po ay false. Fluorine has the greatest electronegativity while cesium and francium have the least electronegativity value. True or false? Tamang sagot po ay true. Water with a bent molecular shape is classified as a polar molecule. True or false? Tamang sagot po ay true. Sulfur hexafluoride has 6 bonded electrons and no lone pair in its central atom. True or false? Tamang sagot po ay true. Panguling katanungan, hydrogen cyanide exhibits a linear geometry. True or false? Tamang sagot po ay true. So let us recall the chemical bonds that we have learned from our junior high school. So in ionic bond, a metal loses its valence electron and the non-metal ion accepts the electron. Covalent bonds, on the other hand, are formed by sharing of valence electrons. All right? So ang topic po natin, gaya ng nasabi ko po sa pagsisimula po natin, ay tungkol po sa polarity. So the polarity of the molecule is determined by the electronegativity difference of the atoms involved and the geometrical shape of the molecule that is determined by the valence shell electron pair repulsion theory. Bawat atom ay may kanya-kanyang electronegativity value. So the higher the electronegativity value, the stronger the attraction of the electron to its atom. The trend in electronegativity is that it increases from the left of the periodic table to the right. Down a group, the electronegativity value decreases. All right. The electronegativity value of the element, as I have said, it increases from left to right in the periodic table or in the period. The value, however, decreases down within the group. How do you look for the electronegativity values in your periodic table? So, ang value po ng electronegativity values ay indicated po per element. So, it all depends upon how these values are presented in your periodic table. We can predict the type of chemical bonds formed by getting the, the electronegativity difference of the bonded atoms. So an electronegativity difference of greater than or equal to 1.7 is considered as an ionic bond. A polar covalent bond is formed if the electronegativity value is is equal to 0.5 to 1.6. A non-polar covalent bond, on the other hand, is formed if the electronegativity difference is equal to or lesser than 0.4. So we can predict the bond between the following diatomic molecule by getting their electronegativity difference. So we have here 5 examples. So we have calcium and chlorine, chlorine and chlorine, hydrogen and chlorine, sulfur and oxygen, and carbon and nitrogen. So for the first item, paano po natin hanapin ang electronegativity difference ng carbon at saka chlorine, ng calcium at saka chlorine? So if we look at the periodic table and look for the values, electronegativity values of calcium and chlorine, so we will find the following. The electronegativity value of calcium is 1.0, while that of chlorine is 3.0. So subtract these values, just disregard the negative sign, and after subtracting the value, so what we get is 2.0. And from the value, we can consider the bond to be ionic. For number 2, chlorine and chlorine. So ang value po ng chlorine is 3.0 and subtracting the number by itself, of course, is equal to 0. So dahil 0 po ang electronegativity difference, so that makes the bond between two chlorine atoms as a non-polar covalent bond. For number 3, we have hydrogen and chlorine. The value of hydrogen, electronegativity value rather, is 2.1. Ang chlorine naman is 3.0. So, getting the difference will give us 0.9. And from the table, 0.9, the electronegativity difference of 0.9 will give us a polar covalent bond. For number 4, sulfur and oxygen. So the electronegativity value of sulfur is 2.5, while that of oxygen is 3.5. So getting the difference, okay. So what is the electronegativity difference then? 2.5 minus 3.5 is tama. So we'll get 1.0. And a value of 1.0 will give us a polar covalent bond. Right? For the last example, we have carbon and nitrogen. So ang value po ng carbon is 2.5 while that of nitrogen is 3.0. So if we'll subtract these two values, okay, ilan po ang electronegativity difference? So that will give us 0.5. And a value of 0.5 will give us, of course, a polar covalent bond. So that is how we predict the type of bond formed by using the electronegativity difference. And now, there is another way of predicting the polarity of the molecule. So first, let us describe what a polar covalent bond is in terms of the sharing of electrons. So besides the value range that defines a polar covalent bond, pwede po nating i-describe ang isang polar covalent bond by its unequal sharing of electrons. So in a polar covalent bond, one atom is partially positive while the other one is partially negative. So it forms an electric dipole. So this dipole is represented by this figure. The partially positive atom is the one with a lower electron negativity value. Okay, pakitandaan po, ang partially positive atom ay yung atom na may lower electron negativity value. Ang partially negative atom naman, that is the one with a higher electron negativity value. So once again, just refer to your periodic tables in order to determine kung ano po ang electronegativity values ng iba't ibang atoms. So to accurately portray the partially positive and the partially negative atom with the use of this symbol, do not forget po to point the arrow from the least electron negative atom. So in this case, we have here hydrogen in a hydrogen chloride compound or molecule. So the arrow should point from the least electron negative atom or the partially positive one to the more electron negative one or the partially negative atom. So how about for a non-polar covalent bond? For a non-polar covalent bond, both atoms share a pair of electrons between them. So para mas ma-refresh po ang ating memory on the sharing of electrons, let us use the dichlorine molecule as an example. So looking at your periodic table, Chlorine has a valence electron of 7. So ano po itong valence electron? So these are the outermost electrons. And chlorine do not exist as a solitary atom. So it needs a partner. So it exists in pair in nature. So as you can see in this slide, both chlorine atoms share a pair of electrons between them. So this single bond is already a pair of electron, which means dalawa po ang electron na nandito sa single bond. So these two chlorine atoms share this pair of electron in order for them to satisfy the octet rule, where the atom's valence shell should be filled with 8 electrons. So, gaya na sabi ko po kanina, ang valence electron ng chlorine is 7. So, we have here 2 chlorine atoms. So, that makes the total electron to be distributed as 14. So, let us count the number of electrons in this molecule. So, let's take into account the valence electron of 7. So, dahil dalawa, ang total electron na i-distribute po natin on these 2 atom is 14. So when chlorine bonded with another chlorine, so these both share a pair of electron. And then total number of electron po is 14, so meron na pong dalawa. And the rest of the electron, we will distribute that around the chlorine atoms. So, ate pong bilangin if this will correspond to 14 electrons. So, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. All right. So, that satisfies the octet rule and the number of valence electron each atom has. So for a chlorine molecule, okay, which again exists by pair in nature, so both of these atoms have equal electronegativity value. So pareho po ang electronegativity value ng dalawa, which means that if we get the electronegativity difference, we'll get 0. So the bond that exists between these two chlorine atom or this chlorine molecule is a non-polar covalent one. So which means both of these chlorine atoms have the equal ability to attract electrons to each side. Right? So this is the other way of predicting the polarity of the molecule. This is the valence shell electron pair repulsion or VSEPR theory. So this VSEPR theory determines the geometry of the molecule. So this is a model used to predict the shape of the molecules. So we have different molecular shapes depending on the orientation of the central atom and the terminal atoms. So ito po yung different shapes. So we have linear, trigonal planar, bent, tetrahedral, trigonal pyramid, trigonal bipyramid, and octahedral. So in these sites, wala pong description kung ilang band at lone pair ang nasa central atom. So in the next slide, you will be able to see a table detailing the bands and the number of lone pairs corresponding to a particular geometry. So in this table, we have the number of pairs or bands, then the arrangement of the molecule, then the number of lone pairs and the corresponding geometry. And to be able to determine the molecular shape through VSEPR, kailangan po nating i-review kung paano po gumawa ng Lewis dot structures ng molecules. And since we cannot do that in my segment right now, So may link po ako on the next slide as to how to make a Lewis dot structure. So i-review lang po natin dahil na-take up na po natin itong Lewis dot structure during our junior high school. Okay, I also made a link para makarefer po kayo sa kompletong table ng molecular geometries. Okay, paki-pause po at paki-screenshot na lamang po ang slide nito para makita nyo po ang link at para ma-access nyo po ang site kung paano i-draw ang Lewis dot structures. Okay, do the same thing here. Paki-screenshot, paki-pause po at screenshot na lamang po ang link para mas madali nyo pong ma-access ang site para mas makarefer po kayo kung ano ang iba't ibang klaseng molecular geometries. Ayan. So, to predict the molecular shape, kailangan natin tukuyin po kung ano ang magiging central atom at ano po ang magiging terminal atom in a molecule. Then, atin pong tingnan ang electronegativity value sa periodic table. So, ang atom po na may pinakamaliit na value ay siyang magiging central atom. So matapos po nating ma-identify ang terminal at saka central atom, then we will draw the appropriate Lewis structure. Then bilangin na po natin ang bonding pair ng electron at non-bonding pair or the lone pairs around the central atom. At kapag nagawa na po natin ang unang tatlong hakbang ay maaari na po nating tukuyin kung ano ang magiging geometry ng molecule. So let us start with boron trichloride. So if we will look at the electronegativity value of boron and chlorine, ang boron po ang may mas maliit na electronegativity value. So it will be boron, which will be the central atom, and chlorine will be the terminal atom. Then we'll draw the appropriate Lewis dot structure. So before we draw the Lewis dot structure, we have to get the total valence electron of the atoms first. So ang boron po ay may tatlong valence electron and chlorine has 7. Dahil tatlo po ang chlorine atom, so multiply 7 by 3, then we get 21. Then 21, add 3, then we have a total of 24 electrons. Then after that, we will distribute the 24 electrons equally among the atoms. So we'll write boron as the central atom, then chlorine as the terminal atoms. So i-connect po natin ang chlorine to the central atom via a single bond. So we have 1, 2, 3. So each bond has 2 electrons. So all in all, okay, meron na pong 6 from the single bonds. Then the remaining 18 is distribute it around the terminal atom. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Right. So we have already, so the distribution of these electrons complies with the octet rule. Right? So from the Lewis dot structure, we can see that ilan po ang ating bonding pair at ilan naman po ang ating lone pair. Right. Tatlo po ang bonding pair at 0 ang lone pair. So now let us refer this table. Let us refer this to the table of molecular geometry. Yan. So this is the table. So where does boron fit according to the table. All right. So from the table, we can see that the molecular geometry of boron trichloride is trigonal planar. So it has been determined that both the electron pair and the molecular geometry of boron trichloride is trigonal planar. And now let's do it with carbon dioxide. So carbon has the least electronegativity value. So carbon is the central atom and oxygen as the terminal atom. All right, so draw the appropriate Lewis structure by distributing the electrons. So carbon has 4 valence electron, oxygen has 6, and there are 2, so the total is 12, then add 4, so we have 16, and then distribute it according to the rules in the Lewis dot structure, at ito po ang magiging Lewis dot structure ng carbon dioxide. So this structure satisfies the octet rule of having 8 electrons per atom. So ilan po ang bonding pairs at ilan po ang lone pairs? So in this case, ilan po? Right. We only consider the bond connecting oxygen to carbon as a single bond, though technically both are connected via a double bond. So the number of bonding pairs are only 2, and there are 0 lone pairs at the central atom. And looking at the table, so where does carbon dioxide fit in? All right. So carbon dioxide therefore is linear. So we're able to determine that carbon dioxide is linear. All right, this time we'll try chloroform or CHCl3. So getting the electronegativity values, okay, makikita po natin dito na hydrogen po ang may pinakamaliit na electronegativity value. Pero hindi po pwede maging central atom ang hydrogen. Bakit po? Dahil it can only accommodate 2 electrons. So dahil exempted po ang hydrogen, so definitely carbon will be our central atom with hydrogen and chlorine as the terminal atoms. All right. So we get the total valence electron and we'll get 26. 4 from carbon, 1 from hydrogen, and 7 from chlorine, in which there are 3 of them, so the total of 26. And so this is the appropriate Lewis dot structure. So ilan po ang bonding pair? Ilan naman po ang lone pair? So from the looks of it, there are 4 bonding pairs and there are 0 lone pairs at the central atom. So that would make chloroform as, all right. So therefore, chloroform is tetrahedral molecule. So the molecular geometry as well as the electron pair orientation of chloroform or CHCl3 is tetrahedral. So now that we are able to determine the geometry via VSEPR, so paano po natin ma-determine kung polar o non-polar ba ang molecule with the use of VSEPR? So we can determine the polarity by using these guidelines. So if the shape of the molecule is symmetrical in 3D, so the molecule is, okay, that's right, non-polar. If it's not, the molecule is polar covalent. And another guideline, if all the atoms bonded to the central atom are the same, so that makes the molecule a non-polar covalent molecule. But kapag hindi pareho ang mga terminal atoms or the atoms bonded to the central atom, so that makes the molecule as a polar covalent molecule. So now that we have learned to determine the polarity of the molecule through its geometry, so let us try to determine if the following molecules are polar or non-polar. So tingnan po natin ang number 1. Using the guideline. Okay. All the atoms bonded to the central atom are the same. However, there is a lone pair. Same with number 2. All the bonded atoms or the terminal atoms are the same, only that in the central atom, may dalawang lone pair. For number 3, okay, walang lone pair sa central atom and all the bonded atoms or terminal atoms are alike. So, saan po dito ang polar at saan po dito ang non-polar? Alright? So, that is correct. So, number 1 and 2 are polar covalent molecules, while okay, number 3 is a non-polar covalent molecule. So, what makes number 1 and 2 polar covalent? So, for ammonia, the presence of a lone pair at the central atom makes it polar. And the same is true with water molecule. Dahil may dalawang lone pair existing on the central atom. Right? So, you can try answering this question po in order to appreciate the things we have learned from our session today. So, for the first question, ammonia is a polar molecule while boron trifluoride is a non-polar molecule. So, explain the difference in the polarity of this compound. Number 2, suppose that AB3E, a hypothetical molecule, is discovered. Predict whether the molecule is nonpolar by determining its molecular shape. All right, so you can answer this after this session. You can also refer to your module to check whether your answer is correct or not. At yan po ang ating tutorial session para sa linggong ito. See you po next week. Same time, 4 to 4:40 in the afternoon. Binabati ko po lahat ng staff, mga office personnel, education program specialist, education program supervisor, aming assistant schools division superintendent, at aming schools division superintendent sa schools division office ng Ormoc City. Once again, this is your tutor for this segment, Tutor Lester. Para sa bata, para sa bayan. Kita-kita po next week.
Sigurado ako na marami ka na namang natutuhan sa ating ETUlay tutorial session ngayong araw. Tandaan, ito ay hindi lamang para sa ating mga mag-aaral, kundi pati rin sa ating mga minamahal na guro at mga magulang na kaagapay natin para maituloy ang pagkatuto sa kabila ng nararanasang pandemya. Patuloy ding sumubaybay sa DepEd TV para sa mga araling ginawang video episodes. Mapapanood ito mula Lunes hanggang Sabado, alas 7 ng umaga hanggang alas 7 ng gabi sa inyong mga telebisyon. Abangan bukas mula alauna ng tanghali ang iba pang aralin sa ating ETUlay free online tutorial session sa English. I-like and subscribe at manatiling nakasubaybay sa ating ETUlay tutorial session sa DepEd Edtech Unit FB page at Educational Technology Unit channel sa YouTube at sa DepEd Tayo at DepEd Philippines social media accounts. Paalam!